Hey all, Zach Lokes. So let's talk about permabed forming and specifically with two-wheel tractors or 2W tractors. This is one of a few different styles that you can use in order to form permabeds with two-wheel tractors. And there's several stages that are in this process, and some of these stages we talk about in other lectures, but it's important to kind of go into detail again. So to get started, you want to measure the plot, stake the edges, and plot center at each end. You need to know your final plot. Like say the plot down here in the bottom right of your screen. This is a perma plot, and you can see that there is a number of beds, and they all have a similar bed width. And this is important to know from the beginning. How many beds are going to be in this plot, and what are the width of these beds? Once you've defined your permabed architecture, your bed width, say 48 inches from center of path to center of path, then you know that if you're going to have, 8 beds or 9 beds or 12 beds or 3 beds, that it's simply a question of multiplying, 3, 4, 8, 9, 12 by 48 inches. And that gives you your total plot. Now, I always would build the beds a little larger than what you need, so that you don't end up with edges that are a little rough, edges that don't have a completely turned over ground. So that's important. And then you want to come in and you want to mark off those corners, such as the top image here, where you can see here is the headland. This is called the headlands here at the end, and there's your plot about 100 feet long, and there's the other far off headland. So here you have a corner marked off. Let's say this is a given measurement, say maybe 9 times 48 inches and 9 times 48 inches, and this is measured at 100 feet and 100 feet. And you can even square this off using various methods of squaring your rectangle here. So at the corners to make 90-degree angles. And then you measure off the middle. So you just cut that distance in half and you put a stake in, and then you put one at the far end, cutting that distance of that headland in half. And this is your middle. Now, it's important to say this is the same process for simply plowing your garden. And it's a good idea to plow the garden even before building these beds. But you can build them from scratch using this method as well. But I like to also just plow everything and have it then even tilled. I'm not a big fan of excessive tillage later, but when it comes to building beds from scratch, we need to use earthworks. I'm just going to put this in here as a little side. We need earthworks. We need to turn the ground over. We need to create disturbance. We are changing the ecosystem, and then once we change it to an annual ecosystem, hopefully integrated with perennials as well. You can see there's fruit trees down here that are planted on either side of this new plot, but what you want is to change over that ecosystem. So we want a certain amount of disturbance to begin with. Regardless, this is how you'd go about plowing and building beds from scratch. Is this process of layout. Now, we're talking about how to build beds using a rotary plow, which is an attachment for the two-wheel tractor. The rotary plow shoots soil out the right-hand side. You can see it in the image here. It's shooting out this right-hand side. Depending on how you are working, you might take this guard off here. This will allow more soil to be thrown further. So when you're forming beds from scratch, you might not want that on, but if you're reforming beds, this will help limit the throw of soil if you're just trying to lift path material back onto the bed top. So in this case, what you do is you come along with the rotary plow, and in this first pass, you are going along following this midline that you marked out with those 2 center stakes. You can do that by following along various ways. I find that if the garden is completely plowed and tilled to begin with, then a good way to follow it is just to make marks in the soil underneath that midline, and then you can center your tractor and trench dead center. If you are in grass, as this image is showing here, then it's good to have some flags. As you can see here, there's some little flags that can be pulled out as you work along, or even easier for this first run, your buddy comes along and just pulls them out in front of you, and that way you follow along. Or if you feel like you can wing it, then go ahead and just, aim down the line and do it the old-fashioned way of just working long by aiming far off in the distance and keeping a straight run. What's helpful is to have a two-wheel tractor with a locking differential. By pulling back and locking your differential, your wheels are less likely to deviate from your straight path. And if you're, of course, on more of a flat ground, this is easier to follow overall. So that first pass, you're following that midline to start the trench. The second pass, you're coming back, and this time you're putting your left wheel into that trench. And this is really how the rotary plow functions, is that one of the wheels is in the trench, really allowing you to grab that soil and throw it. Really that corkscrew, that turning mechanism of the rotary plow is really grabbing soil and throwing it away from that trench. So with your left tire in the trench, you can widen that trench along that midline. And with that third pass, you come back again. This time again, you're heading away from where you originally started, and you keep that left tire in the trench. You're always keeping that left tire in the trench because the rotary plow, unless it's the swivel model where you can switch the plow to throw soil either direction, it's always your left tire that goes down, and soil is always being thrown to the right, and you should always be walking, behind it or just to the left, so you're not in the way of where the soil is being thrown. So that third pass, you're finishing widening that trench. And this is really important. And by the way, this is the same process that's used for plowing, because at this point, what you start to do now is actually fill that trench back in. And the reason you do this is that the bed is going to end up being centered on that plowed line. And that's because you don't want to have the soil underneath your bed as unturned soil. It needs to be turned soil. It needs to be tilled soil. It needs to be, in this case, plowed soil. So we are, again, coming through here, and we are plowing. We're plowing this trench, but then we're coming back, starting on the fourth pass, and we're filling back in the trench. And again, now on the fifth pass, we're making another pass, coming along the other side, and we're filling back over the trench. And again, with the sixth pass. However, what's going to happen is you're actually going to see a bed starting to form rather than just filling it in back on level. Why is that? Well, it has to do with the fact that you've actually loosened the soil and introduced air into the soil. You're starting to actually create a soil that's more than just the packed earth. And for the vast majority of sites that are turning into a garden from scratch, they will be packed earth, which won't have a lot of porosity in it. And so that pore space, which most soils should have about 50% porosity for air and water, is introduced by turning it and opening it up and kind of getting it back. And then it's maintained by having organic matter and having soil life, which we talk about in our soil lectures. But suffice to say that when we do these passes, we start to see a raised bed forming with that sixth pass. Even though we did 3 trenching passes and 3 filling passes, it starts to look like a raised bed. But you can actually keep going and actually either widening it or raising it higher by making more passes. And those subsequent passes can be managed by being closer to the raised bed or further out from it in terms of whether you want to go higher or wider. And of course, once you get to this point, then you can start to make the beds adjacent to it by going along and following the same process. Again, the easiest way of doing this is to actually have it all plowed and all tilled from scratch, and then you come back through and do this. But this is a good infographic here because most of it is relevant to also the plowing process, because as you see here, once you've filled this in, this midline, you start to end up with this mid-ridge. And in this case, this mid-ridge is your first permabed. But if you were plowing the whole field, you would work concentric circles around this mid-ridge. Here, the guy has the left tire here, and continuing to bite into the soil over here and throw it this way, and then passing on this side would continue to make these exact same motions that we're seeing here, going downfield, coming up, going down, coming up. Just keep turning and coming around, but this time you're making concentric circles around it, and this ends up plowing the whole plot, going like this. So this can be a really a good infographic for that reason, is that it's showing you that setup. So anyways, that is to say that with the permabed, forming process using the two-wheel tractor. You can use the rotary plow, and this is a great implement to do this. It also can be used to do the primary plowing of a field and then be used again to form permabeds and be used in subsequent years to help reform permabeds by pulling path material and applying it to the bed top. And it has a number of other uses as well, such as the way that we use it for nurturing fruit trees by helping fill in trenches around newly planted trees. So what we want to do here is really think about how we can start to use our equipment in different ways. And so this is an example of an implement that can be used throughout your farming or market gardening or landscape design career. And but there are other ways as well. So you can check out some of the content we have about how to build permabeds using hand tools, using power ridgers, and even the four-wheel tractor. All right, so we'll see you next time.